Welcome to the Swike Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Swike Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Swike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. I'm your host Lukey, and today's topic I thought we'd go into cultivating a success mindset. And a lot of folks have reached out to me and they saw my model, the St. Far method, STFAR, right? And they want to understand a little bit about, well, how did that come about and how did we kind of create that? So the origination of it was obviously I was working with clients to try to get them into peak performance, and there were oftentimes their barriers were some sort of mindset barriers, right? Something in between your head that was an obstacle. It's not generally a resource issue, it was just a thought that they need to get through. And I read a book, it's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he has a quote there that's often cited, something to the effect of between stimulus and response there is a space, and within that space lies all of man's freedoms, right? So that really stuck with me, and originally I thought, you know what, it's kind of like the typical cause and effect, right? Something happens and you react to it, right? And that's one of the challenges, where oftentimes when something happens, we react to it, right? What we want to do instead is we want to respond to it, right? Don't want this automatic thing to happen where we get angry, we get frustrated, we get sad, or even we get happy on that. Oftentimes we want to think a little bit, and that's where that space comes into importance, right? So it went from stimulus to response, so it makes sense because the S and the R from St. Far, those are kind of the bookends of it. And then I did a lot of work in the realm of habits, right? So Charles Duhigg, who wrote Habits, has a model where he uses the Q, which is the C, and then action and then a reward, right? So I found that quite similar, where you have a cue, which is your stimulus, you have an action in the middle, and then you have a reward. Well, that's the response and the thing that happens afterwards. So that kind of expanded, and you can see the S and the AR that are in there, and it increases. And then I went into the work of Wayne Dyer, who wrote a lot of books on like mindset and spirituality and things like that. And that's where the T and the F came from. So there, in his teachings and his wording, he basically said something to the effect that where from your thoughts generate your feelings, which generate your actions, right? So that went from the TFA, so that became the St. Far, STFAR. Then recently actually came across someone named Brooke Castillo, who runs the life coach school, and she actually has pretty much the same model, except she uses a C, circumstance, CTFAR, and I use the S. So I was like, oh wow, at least I'm in good company in terms of thinking in that. And then actually, as you go out into it, there's so many people who have very similar models or slightly different, where it might be more or less ones in there, but I thought that was helpful. And really, if you start taking that model and evaluating your life and evaluating all the different things that happen to you against that model, what is that stimulus, what is that thing, what is that cue, what is that circumstance that happened, and then thinking about, well, what thought, right? A quote that I love is from actually Shakespeare and Macbeth, where they say, for there is nothing good or bad, and thinking makes it so. Right? So if you think about that for a minute, right? Nothing is good or bad, right? It's up to the person. Where a knife, it's not good or bad. If it's a chef that's using the knife, then it's good. If it's a robber or a thug, probably not so much. If it's a doctor using it as a scalpel, then that's good. If the doctor is trying to rob someone because their kids are hungry and they're without food or whatever because he lost their job, well, that's not a good thing too, right? So it's very circumstantial, and oftentimes, irrespective of the context, there's a perspective to be taken, right? And it's kind of the glass half empty, glass half full type of analogy, where there's oftentimes always two ways to think about it. You can always think about it from the aspect of limiting yourself, or to expand yourself and give yourself lots of opportunities. So that's where the thought comes in. Now the big challenge, back to that Viktor Frankl quote, is a lot of those thoughts are automatic, right? Those are the things that we've been conditioned to think over the course of the years, and sometimes we don't even question it, right? So if you look at the work of folks like Byron Katie, right, she uses the work, and one of the first things you do when you have a thought is ask yourself, is it true, right? That thought, is it true? And oftentimes when you examine it, it's like, that's true, maybe in this context, but not in the whole, because her second question is, do you 100% know it's true? Because sometimes you might say, oh, I'm not good enough, right? And maybe you didn't do well, you failed an interview, didn't do so well, but you might have done better in the past, right? So it's not 100% true, or it's just true in this particular circumstance. But the other aspect is another quote that I love, and as you know that I love quotes. This quote is, I never lose, I either win or I learn, right? So if you take that cue, that circumstance, that stimulus that just happened, right? If you take it from the aspect of what did I learn from it, then it opens up a whole realm of a possibility, right? So one of the goals is to intercept that thought before it gets to a feeling, right? Because oftentimes that thought triggers an emotion, right? The emotion causes you to get angry, get upset, maybe you get sad and depressed or whatever it is, and then it oftentimes spurns you into an action, whether you lash out at someone or you withdraw inside and you start trying to escape through social media or through like a streaming service like Netflix or whatever, or through food, right? Or through like the gaming or other things that don't necessarily help you in the long run, right? But oftentimes if you can examine and say, you know what, where did that feeling come from? What thought did I have? And backtrack, then what you can do is kind of almost reprogram yourself and say, okay, next time I have this thought, this is how I want to feel instead. Taking that negative path and make it into a more positive path, because like I mentioned, there's always multiple ways of seeing things, at least two, if not more. And yes, there are bad things that happen in the world, but oftentimes it's up to you to describe it as bad, right? If you actually take a look at a lot of the successful people, some of the worst things that have happened to them were their biggest life lessons, right? And you've probably had that in your life too, where something that in the moment felt that it was horrible ended up being your biggest learning or allowed you to do something else. Clients of mine have lost their jobs, right? And in the moment, it's bad, right? It doesn't make you feel good to be rejected and lose your stability and employment. And for some of them, they were like top performers and doing really well. And for one reason or another, they decided to like let go of the entire unit, or the company was changing direction, so their job was kind of made redundant, that sort of thing. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, and nothing related to them and their personal performance or anything, but they made it about them, right? So it became a little bit more challenging. But what they did is intercepted that thought and realized, you know what, this could be my opportunity to find something that I really love. Like the job was good, they were okay, they were kind of a 6 or 7 out of 10, but why not be able to go out there and find a job that's an 8 or 9, right? Something that would challenge them more, something where they can learn and grow, right? And taking that perspective is a lot more motivating and carries them forward into that and leads them to do more actions that get them the results that they want, right? So that kind of completes the same. So if you look at the 4 agreements, it's a book by Don Miguel Ruiz, and the first agreement is be impeccable with your words, right? So if you think about your thoughts, right, they're actually just words in your head, right? Some people think in pictures, some people hear them, some people kind of see the words, but there's some sort of representation of words in your head, right? And some of the things, those thoughts that you have in your head, those words in your head, you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy, right? So a lot of us beat ourselves up. It's like, oh, why are you so dumb? Why are you so useless? Why are you so whatever? And sometimes it's a little bit less harsh on that, but oftentimes they're not helpful. They're not ones that serve you. So instead of thinking of it as good or bad, thinking of it, is this helpful for you in this moment? Is this going to help motivate you to do whatever you want to do? And if the answer is yes, well, then continue to think those thoughts. If the answer is no, then what could you think instead? What could you do to adjust that? And a lot of these, like I mentioned before, are habits, right? They become kind of that reactive. So oftentimes to change a habit, it can be quick. Sometimes it takes some time. So putting in and going through it, the motion, like the first time you take one route to work or to school or whatever, it becomes a habit. And to pick a different route, sometimes it becomes a habit quite easily that way, sometimes it becomes more difficult. And you'll have to look into all sorts of different things in order to set up your habit. But the point is to make the effort to switch that and make your words impeccable, right? So always think of the opportunity that you can find. So you can always think of something as a limitation, or you can always think of it as an opportunity. It's your choice. So for something that is limiting to you, say, okay, how can this be the greatest gift to me ever? how can I use this to my advantage, right? How could me losing my job or not getting accepted, or that person saying no or whatever, how can I use this to learn something, right? That I never lose either, win or learn. How can I use it to grow, and how can I use it to benefit me in the future? And then when you start doing that, then your feelings change, and your feelings become ones from a place that serves you, and you can take that to be able to take the actions that help you grow. And when you take those positive actions, you might not see results right away, but that culmination of those actions grow over time, right? So if you think about cultivating that success mindset, then what you want to do is think of that model, STFAR, right? So think about the stimulus, the things that happen to you, the circumstances, the cues, right? And then what are the thoughts that happen, right? And if you can't do it in the moment, then what you want to do is do it retroactively. Think of those moments in your day where it was challenging, reflect back and say, what was that thought that I had? And what was the feeling that I had, right? And how do you adjust your thought so that it gives you a different feeling? And that different feeling will spur you to do different results. And those different results will spur you to get different actions. And it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy, right? So just keep in mind that there might be a little bit of challenge, because what you're doing is trying to rewire, I guess, your brain and your neural pathways. And your brain, unfortunately, likes to do things that it's comfortable with, things that are comfortable, which are the same. And it knows that by continuing doing what it's done in the past, then you'll survive, right? Because you're surviving. But what you don't want to do is to just survive. You want to thrive and grow. And sometimes there's another quote that I like is discomfort is the currency of success, right? So being uncomfortable is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Especially when you are doing it for the purpose of growth, something that you haven't done before, something that you actually are a little bit more excited about. So if you actually think of is this discomfort serving me in terms of, wow, this is something I need to learn, I need to grow, I need to do something that I haven't done before, or is it not serving me in the sense that, oh, I'm just putting myself down, I'm thinking these negative thoughts, and I'm worrying so much that it's not allowing me to do what I want to do. So take that model and explore on your own to really cultivate that success mindset, and that's kind of how the model came to be, and hopefully you can use that. And I'll probably continue to refine it and give you some more tools and tips to do that, but take it and use it in your own practice, and then hopefully you can grow and cultivate that mindset of career success. Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.